Good evening. I want to talk to you tonight about a vision of, or really a new way of thinking about what I'm going to call religiously purposeful or Jewishly purposeful leadership. I think we oftentimes, when we think about Jewish educational leadership, we bifurcate between the Jewish, the educational, and the leadership. This plays out in our training programs. This plays out in our hiring processes. We're looking for leaders with MBAs. We're looking for educators with PhDs in education. And of course, we're looking for the Jewish as well, rabbinic ordination or its equivalent. My concern is that thinking about these in a bifurcated way actually makes this work much less sustainable and in many ways much less rewarding. So tonight I want to think about a vision of religiously purposeful leadership that integrates religious purposefulness, which I'll talk more about, and leadership in ways that make my efforts to live a Jewishly meaningful life actually have an effect on the quality of my leadership, and in ways that make my leadership, my work, my teaching, day in and day out, a laboratory for my growth, not only as an educator and a leader, but as a person and as a Jew. Let me start actually with a definition of leadership. So like we know to be successful, certainly in this role as head of school, and I think as leaders in all of our organizations and throughout our schools, we need a wide range of skills and capacities, skills that I've been blessed to actually learn in leadership training programs like the Day School Leadership Institute, the Harvard Principals Center, and I'm continuing to learn and develop, oftentimes with colleagues and mentors like those of you who are here. These are skills that I'm going to be working on, I assume, for my entire career. But I want to talk about a definition of leadership that goes a little bit deeper than that. And it's a definition that I actually saw in the writings of Parker Palmer, who many people may be familiar with as an educational thinker and writer. Wrote a book called The Courage to Teach. And before I share with you his definition of a leader, I actually want to share with you something he writes about teaching. Partly because I want to give you his educational gestalt, partly because I think actually in a school that really has a strong culture, the ways we think about teaching and learning should actually mirror the ways we think about leading. This is what Parker Palmer says about teaching. Teaching, like any truly human activity, emerges from one's inwardness, for better or worse. As I teach, I project the condition of my soul onto my students, my subject, and our way of being together. Teaching holds a mirror to the soul. If I'm willing to look in that mirror and not run from what I see, I have a chance to gain self-knowledge, and knowing myself is as crucial to good teaching as knowing my students and my subject. For Parker Palmer, teaching, great teaching, can't be reduced to technique. It's about what he calls the identity and the integrity of the teacher. Every time our teachers walk into that classroom or educate kids outside that classroom, it's not just about what they're teaching, it's not just about how they're teaching, it's about the who that teaches. And how true this is for leadership as well. This is what Parker Palmer says about leadership. I'll give you a quick definition of a leader. A leader is a person who has an unusual degree of power to project on other people his or her shadow, his or her light. A leader is a person who has an unusual degree of power to create the conditions under which other people must live and move and have their being, and in schools and teach and learn. Conditions that can either be as illuminating as heaven or as shadowy as hell. A leader is a person who must take special responsibility for what's going on inside him or herself, inside his or her consciousness, lest the act of leadership create more harm than good. That's a definition of leadership. For Parker Palmer, and I have found this to be true, and I suspect others have as well, leadership is a profoundly moral and spiritual endeavor. I have to take responsibility for my inner life, because like it or not, that inner life plays out every single day in my work, for the people whom I lead, and for the culture that I create. I think that when you think about the skills and capacities that we oftentimes learn in leadership training programs, they're critical for our work, but then you have to make a real hard budgetary decision that's not just about numbers. It's about people's lives. Then you have a family who's had 3 kids in your school, have a child apply, and you're not sure you can serve them. And you've got to decide what you're going to do. 2 members of your senior leadership team are having trouble getting along, and it's creating tension in your team, and it's playing out in their work. Little things. You have a person in your office. They want 10 more minutes of your time. They've got to have your time right now. Your assistant's knocking at your door. You know that if you give them that 10 minutes, it's going to set your schedule off for the rest of the day, and you got to make the call right in that moment. And of course, God forbid, none of us should know it, but many of us have when we have tragedies in our schools. These are moments that aren't about the skills and capacities that you learn, I like to say, in head of school. These moments call for what Parker Palmer calls leading from within. So here's the thing. I've had a sense for a while now that my leadership and my work really are a laboratory for developing myself morally and spiritually and really stretch me as a person, not just as a head of school. But for a while, I got to say, I'm living an engaged Jewish life. I'm learning, I'm praying, I'm observing Jewish practices. But my Judaism wasn't really informing my development as a leader. And what I've come to realize, actually, is that to lead in a religiously purposeful way is to bring my Jewish learning and my Jewish living and my Jewish habits of mind and heart to bear on these very moral and spiritual questions that I deal with as a leader day in and day out. I want to tell you how I came to this way of thinking about it and how it's playing out in our school right now. So I came to this through an ongoing chavruta I have with a teacher in my school, Rabbi David Jaffe. He's a teacher and a friend and a colleague. He's taught Talmud in the school for years, and now he's actually what we call our mashgiach ruchani, our spiritual advisor. Years ago, when David and I were talking about how to do character and Jewish identity development in the school, he said, look, Mark, I've been doing work outside of GAN, actually with adults, in the teachings and the practices of Musar, the kind of Jewish ethical and spiritual tradition, which I'll explain more in a couple minutes. I think it's time for us to start bringing these into our school. I think they could serve the work that we're doing with our kids. And let me tell you a little bit about the Musar that David's talking about, and then I'll tell you how it's playing out with our teaching and our learning and our leading. So Musar is a modern movement. I think its principles probably go back before the modern period, but Musar is a movement that was founded by Rabbi Yisrael Salanter in the 19th century in Eastern Europe, really as a counter to what he saw as the hyper-intellectualism of the yeshiva world. And what Rabbi Salanter was worried about was the fact that no matter how much Torah people studied and how firmly they practiced Jewish law, that if that practice wasn't translating into their heart and then coming out in ethical behavior, this was a real problem. For him, what religious purposefulness is taking our learning and our Jewish practice and translating it into a life of spiritual and ethical purposefulness. So you can see how this could play out in a school. I'm going to talk about 3 principles of Musar that are at play for us right now, just to give you a sense of how we're thinking about it. The first is the concept of Medoot. Many people may be familiar with this term. It's often translated as character traits. We prefer inner qualities or soul traits. So people oftentimes say someone has Medoot or doesn't have Medoot, good Medoot, bad Medoot. That's actually not really the idea behind Medoot. Medoot are kind of like the curriculum, like the roadmap of the inner life. Chesed, compassion, savlanut, patience, anava, humility. Midot like these, we all have them. It's just that we fall in different places on the continuum of these midot. And they play out for us and pour out into our lives, like it or not, in all sorts of different ways. So midot are really the curriculum. And the way we explore our midot is with this concept of hitlamdut. Another Musar concept comes from the word lomed, to learn, hitlamdut. You could translate it as reflective practice. I kind of like to think of it as taking a stance of voracious learning to myself and to my world. Hitlamdut is the capacity to step back from our lives and observe it non-judgmentally. Not a thing Jews like to do, actually, I think. And the concept behind Hitlamdut is that if you really want to change and grow, you have to start by being able to actually look at yourself, in some ways like a text, and to be able to see your patterns, to see how these midot are playing out for you, and to get a sense of where I'm holding and where my key growth points are. So the third principle that we're working with is a principle, and all of these have their origins in classic works of Musar, of Bethere points. This notion of choice points or Bethere points, which basically says this: all day long in our lives, whether we're conscious of it or not, we are making little choices. And I like to think of Bethere points actually as kind of where the rubber hits the road of our character and our identity. Right? These are moments when, if we slowed down and paid attention enough, we might realize that my best self is calling me to do one thing, and maybe the part of me that is a little more habituated, my learned behaviors, are pulling me in another way. We face this all the time in little ways, sometimes big ways, and most of the time we just blow through these Bethere points and keep going as usual. Sometimes, by the way, I think these Bethere points are actually points of serious value, tension, and conflict. And if we don't actually slow down enough to explore that, it's going to be really hard to make choices that help us to be our best selves and our best educators and our best leaders. So the idea behind Bethere points is slowing down enough to identify where those points are in our lives that are the key growing edge places. This is the idea behind Musar, and I want to tell you how it's playing out in our school. We basically said, look, we think Musar could be a key to doing school-wide character and Jewish identity work. We want to be a school where our students are growing and developing, not just intellectually, but also morally and spiritually and Jewishly. And we know that if that's going to really happen, really happen, and if we're going to really build a culture around that, it's not going to happen through values on a wall, and it's not going to happen through another ethics lab that we have with the whole school. It's got to pervade our practice. Our teachers have to find teachable moments in every area of the school and have the language, the Jewish language and the process to make those moments growth opportunities for our students in terms of their character and their Jewish identity. So what are we doing? We say, look, this is, if you really want to have students who are on this kind of journey, who are developing as people and as Jews, guess where it has to start? It's got to start with the adults. We can't have students who are growing and developing and teachers who are just delivering a packaged curriculum. So we actually decided, let's start with the teachers. We've got teachers now who are getting together monthly, studying an in-depth midah, really getting inside this midah, not just as a Hebrew word for a general concept, but actually the Jewish value, let's say, of patience, savlanut. And they're bringing practice, bringing dilemmas of their own practice in school, where savlanut is playing out. And then they're talking to each other, and they're helping each other. Then they're journaling, and they're having chavruta, partner work, in the middle of the month. And they're taking on commitments to say, where is this midah alive for me in my work, and I think necessarily in my life? And how can I identify moments where I can just take one step toward my best self as far as this midah is concerned? And that's going to play out in the work that they do with their students. This is extraordinary because our teachers are committing to taking responsibility for their inner lives, as Parker Palmer says, and for how that plays out in their teaching throughout the day, in and out of the classroom. So David, as a very wise change thinker, said to me, look, Mark, if we're going to do this with teachers and we're going to do it with students, it's got to start with leaders. If we want to have an organization where our teachers are learning and growing and our students are learning and growing, guess who also has to be learning and growing? The senior leaders of the school, starting with me. And also, if this is going to be the language that shapes the way we think about character and identity in the school, you got to own that language. So we start a chavruta together. We start learning these midot. And within a very short amount of time, I realized this is far more than a symbolic exercise. This is not just about me being able to give her Devar Torah and use midah language. All of a sudden, I realized, my God, this has extraordinary relevance for my leadership and my work. I want to give you an example of how this is playing out. We have been talking in my school for years about the concept of operational excellence, something that some people may be familiar with. My CFO has been telling me we've got to put more focus on organization and systems and structures. You know, we do the big things really well, but we got to also focus on the little things because people are feeling our operations. I, of course, smile, nod, and I don't even know what she means by operational excellence. But it's on our leadership team's goals, it's on our school-wide priorities, and we're all talking about improving operational excellence, and none of us really have any shared sense of what that really looks like or why it's actually a value. So we are, thanks to the support of the Covenant Foundation and Avichai, we're really experimenting with bringing this Musar into our school. We're now thinking about developing our leadership team as leaders and as a team around this Musar work. So what do we study? We take the midah of Seder, order. We take a text from Rabbi Simcha Zissel Sif of Kelm. I'm not going to read the whole text to you, but basically he says if you want to understand the midah of Seder, it goes like this. Imagine a necklace with beautiful pearls and a clasp. Which is more important? The pearls are all of the inner qualities that a person has, all of these midot, and the clasp is the thing that keeps those pearls together. Think about an organization. By the way, I believe that organizations have midot as well because they're cultures, and those cultures are made up of people, and those people have midot. Think about the midot of our culture. We have our pearls, and then we have our clasp. So we look at this as a group, and we start exploring Seder, and the thing just was extraordinary. All of a sudden, we weren't talking about operational excellence, we were talking about Seder. One of my people says, why the heck are we focusing on the clasp when we're here for the pearls? The pearls are the hearts and minds of our students, the growth and development of our teachers. That's what we're here for. Then I have another person who says, I got to confess, I think I focus a little too much on the clasp. I'm a little worried that it might break, and all these pearls that we invest so much in are going to fall off. And we're in this rich conversation, not about necessarily any detail of operational excellence in our school, but our deeply held beliefs about Seder and its role in our lives, and its role in our leadership, and its role in our school. And then I started thinking about myself as a leader. So I've been thinking about Seder in my own life, I have to confess, for years. I'm a big fan of Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. I just got a new book that was written by a good friend of mine who's actually working with David and I on this project called It's Hard to Make a Difference If You Can't Find Your Keys, by Marilyn Paul. Unfortunately, I have to write a sequel to that book called It's Hard to Make a Difference If You Can't Find It's Hard to Make a Difference If You Can't Find Your Keys. That's my Seder work. And I've known I've got to work on this in my personal life, in my family. What I didn't quite realize was the degree to which my midah of Seder pours out into my team and into my school. My wrestling with saying no to things. My, as my coach likes to say, belief that I am an unlimited resource is going to shape the way that the people around me think they need to work, and is going to play out for everyone whom I lead. So this work with Medoot has really had profound implications for my work as a leader, and it's starting to shape the way we think about religiously purposeful leadership as a school. And let me make clear what I'm saying. This notion of religiously purposeful leadership is one that's not about a Devar Torah before a board meeting. It's not about how observant a leader is. It's not about how much Torah our kids learn. It's not about how often they pray. This is about, those are wonderful things, by the way. It's about how much their Jewish learning and living comes to infuse who we are as people and as leaders and plays out in the way that we lead. Imagine the implications for this, for the way we hire, for the way we develop the leaders in our schools. For conferences like this, imagine coming to this conference and learning all the wonderful things we're learning about how to lead, and then actually talking about the who that leads and thinking about ourselves and our work. I think the implications are incredible. I want to share one last kind of story or text that's often attributed to either Rabbi Yisrael Salanter or the Chafetz Chaim. So one of them was asked, how'd you make such a big impact on the world? Something that may be familiar to people. And they said, look, so I decided I wanted to change the world, he said. And then I failed. So then I tried to change just the Jews of Eastern Europe. I failed. Tried to change my community. I failed. I decided I'd change my family. I failed. Finally, I realized I got to change myself. And that's why I had such a big impact on the world. We are looking to create schools that develop students who are going to change the world. We're trying to find leaders who can change our schools, maybe even our communities. Maybe we should start by looking for leaders who are willing to change themselves, and then create the conditions under which they can pursue that work. When I think about religiously purposeful leadership in this way, I have to say I don't find it overwhelming. I find it actually inspiring and invigorating. At a time when everyone is talking about the crisis in leadership, how are we going to fill all these positions, and how are we going to sustain the leaders who are in these positions, I got to say when I think about leadership this way, when I think about the fact that if I want to grow as a leader, I actually get to grow as a person and as a Jew too, I find my work not only sustainable, I find it joyous and transformational. Thank you.